2015, citizens in China saw something in the skies that just didn't make any sense. But it wasn't your typical unidentified flying object. In fact, you could say that it wasn't a UFO at all, at least not in the traditional sense. Because while it was flying and it was an object, it was clearly identifiable. And people around the world have been seeing them for centuries. Exactly what they are or how they are appearing over our heads continues to remain a mystery. You won't want to miss this one. In the fall of 2015, citizens in the Chinese province of Guangdong woke up to find something strange hovering above them. People stopped in the middle of the streets to stare up into the clouds, and none of them could believe their eyes. The clearest sighting happened in Foshan, a city of over 9 million people. There, suspended in the mist above the skyscrapers, stood a series of tall, rectangular blocks. There's only one way to describe it: a city floating in the clouds. Although witnessed by hundreds, thousands, or hundreds of thousands of people, only this single video made it online. It immediately set the internet on fire. In fact, CNN estimated that 40 billion social media posts and news articles covered the sighting back in 2015. The event generated a flood of speculation. What was it? A magical city, a mirage, or a test run of secret government technology? Julie Wagner, an online commenter, said this.
In my opinion, CERN, HARP, and Project Bluebeam could all have a little something to do with this. We just never know because the media only tells what the elite allow to be told. This is definitely something we will be seeing more of.
Julie was right about the last point. Something similar happened near beach number 1 in Qingdao, east of Shandong province. In 2018, on May 6th, fishermen and people on the shore watched as a strange block of buildings, apparently apartment complexes, simply manifested over the waves. It eventually dissolved into thin air. The province saw the same thing happen again on August 5th, 2019, near Yantai City. Again, an entire skyline of ghostly buildings rose into view early that morning. It lasted for around 4 hours before simply fading away. One Yantai City resident said this.
5点半起床，我今天早上一过来上厨房一看，怎么一个楼在我跟前儿？我觉得挺惊讶的。最后我再仔细看，这个景已经反射到天上，我就认为咱们这个物品很美，是个仙境。
The eyewitness obviously saw something because she had the video to prove it. But what was it exactly? Was it really just a mirage or something stranger? The truth is that this sort of thing has been witnessed for thousands of years, and not just in China, but by people all around the world. And in some cases, there's a clear scientific explanation for it, but sometimes there isn't. We'll talk about the science later. Before getting to that, let's first do a deep dive into historical accounts where people have seen floating cities, because there are tons of them. Now, you're probably familiar with one of the earliest examples of a floating city. In Revelation 21:2-3, Saint John the Divine describes a vision bestowed upon him by an angel. John wrote this.
And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God.
But it doesn't seem like religious visions can be captured on iPhones the way that today's floating cities are. They usually seem reserved for a single individual, like John. What we're seeing in the modern era are witnessed over and over again by hundreds of eyewitnesses. Well, these sorts of floating cities are often the subject of regional folklore. As far back as 1684, Irish historian Roderick O'Flaherty described a wild island of huge rocks to the west of Aran Islands. You see, under certain conditions, Roderick said that these rocks sometimes took on a different appearance. He would write that these rocks sometimes appear to be a great city far off, full of houses, castles, towers, and chimneys, sometimes full of blazing flames, smoke, and people running to and fro. He went on to explain how sometimes people didn't see a city out there, but instead saw a huge fleet of ghostly ships, their sails billowing in the wind. Roderick also made it clear that these apparitions didn't seem to follow rhyme or reason, appearing both in nice weather and on dark and cloudy days. Clearly, O'Flaherty was describing something that a lot of people had seen, and if you look at local folklore, it's obvious that this was something people in this part of the world encounter very often. Irish myths often described a phantom island named Hy-Brasil. Hy-Brasil was said to appear around the same area that Roderick described. Supposedly, the island was invisible except for one day every 7 years. One of the people to record these appearances was W.G. Wood Martin. In 1902, he described a sighting off the coast of Sligo in Ireland's north. He said this:
I myself, upward of half a century ago, saw a wonderful mirage. Had I been looking at the bay for the first time, nothing would have persuaded me but that I was gazing at a veritable city, a large, handsome one, too, trees, houses, spires, and castellated buildings.
Clearly, Ireland and the British Isles have a long-standing history of a mythical floating city. Another magnificent city supposedly appeared in the mid-19th century above North Africa. In his book, The Atmosphere, French astronomer Camille Flammarion discussed the sighting, which was shared with him by a man named Grelois. You see, it was the summer of 1847. Grelois said that he was traveling with a friend on horseback through Algeria. The one day was excruciatingly hot, and he was thinking how nice it would be to finally reach their destination. That's when they saw it. Grelois told Flammarion,
When we had arrived within about 2 leagues of Boone, towards 1 in the afternoon, we were suddenly brought to a halt at a turn in the road by the appearance of a marvelous picture unfolded before our eyes. To the east of Boone, upon a sandy stretch of ground which a few days before we had seen arid and bare, there rose at this moment upon a gently sloping hill running down to the sea, a vast and beautiful city, adorned with monuments, domes, and steeples.
Grelois got a good look at this vision. He said that he stared at this city for almost half an hour, and the entire time he kept trying to convince himself that it was an illusion, but he couldn't. It simply looked too real. As he watched, Grelois was running through different scenarios in his mind. He played with the idea that it might be a reflection of Boone, the nearest city, but it didn't look like that place at all. In fact, it looked more like a large European city than anything he had encountered in Algiers. So Grelois discarded this idea. He then considered that it might be a projection of another town, but the nearest ones were still 20 leagues away. That's 60 miles. Grelois never knew what to make of it. Years later, he told Flammarion, "Whence came this apparition? Are we to suppose it was the reflected image of some large city on the Sicilian coast? That seems to me very improbable." More recently, floating cities have appeared in America too. In fact, if the stories are to be believed, one apparently seems to appear above Alaska from time to time. In his 1923 book, Newlands, famous paranormal author Charles Fort describes how a city sometimes manifests above the tundra at regular intervals. Fort even claimed that Alaska's indigenous inhabitants had been reporting the same thing for centuries. Fort wasn't just making this up. He was referencing older newspaper articles, like the one from October 31st, 1889 edition of the New York Times. In it, the article says how an L.B. French was near Mount Fairweather when he saw something strange in the sky. He described this:
houses, well-defined streets and trees. Here and there rose tall spires over huge buildings, which appeared to be ancient mosques or cathedrals. It did not look like a modern city, more like an ancient European city.
Now, this next part is fascinating and may provide a clue as to what is going on here. Unlike other cities in the sky, the one that appears above Alaska has been positively identified. it's the city of Bristol, England. Again, you don't have to take my word for it, or even Charles Fort's, because it, like modern cities in the sky, was photographed. This picture was taken in 1887 by Richard Willoughby. He claimed to have seen it many times, calling it the Silent City. According to Ritchie, the city always appeared on the longest day of the year, June 21st, near Muir Glacier at Glacier Bay. He was only able to take this solitary photograph. Unfortunately, this picture may actually be a fake. Immediately after Willoughby shared them, rumors began circulating that it wasn't taken in Alaska at all. In fact, the photograph is so clearly a picture of Bristol that a lot of people started claiming it was Bristol. One story claimed that Willoughby bought the picture off an English tourist down by the docks and made the whole story. Who knows? Richard Willoughby had a reputation as a prankster, but he never openly admitted to hoaxing the photograph of his silent city. We'll never find out the truth, at least in this case. But here's the thing. While the picture of Bristol may have been a hoax, these modern videos of cities floating in the clouds are widely regarded as authentic. In fact, in a lot of cases, even scientists admit that they're real. So what is going on here, exactly? Well, it seems like many of these sightings may be the result of a well-documented meteorological phenomenon. Fata Morgana is a natural phenomenon where light passes through layers of air with various temperatures. Because of these differences in temperature, the light bends, causing an illusion where it looks like structures on the ground or in the ocean are actually floating in the air. Fata Morgana can also warp the shape of the object being reflected back, or even present a mirror image. If you do a quick search online for Fata Morgana, you will see hundreds of examples. You may have even seen it yourself at the beach. A ship way off in the distance looks like it's hovering above the water. In reality, it's just a trick of the light. Clearly, Fata Morgana explains a lot of modern sightings of floating cities, including many, but not all. After all, tons of the examples that I've mentioned appear over the water, which offers perfect conditions for the illusion to take place. Fata Morgana might even help explain what has been seen over Alaska. Maybe there's something about the temperature on the longest day of the year that refracts a mirror image of Bristol, all the way to the northernmost part of the United States of America. But other examples are harder to dismiss. Remember, Roderick O'Flaherty described the Phantom Island east of Ireland as appearing even in bad weather. Since rain tends to scatter light, those aren't exactly ideal conditions for Fata Morgana to manifest. Also, remember the story from Algeria? The eyewitness made it a point to say that the city he saw didn't resemble the nearest town. It didn't resemble any of the nearby settlements either, and even if it did, those were 20 leagues away at least, a distance of over 60 miles. If they were just seeing a mirage of one of those neighboring villages, this seems awfully far to project Fata Morgana. This is the same problem with using Fata Morgana to explain Bristol's appearance in Alaska. Another, much more recent story also seems to rule out the possibility of Fata Morgana. Acclaimed researcher and author Barton Nunnally, what's up Barton, said that he saw something strange in the sky over western Kentucky as a child. In his book, The Inhumanoids, Barton wrote this.
My brother Dean and I saw a castle in the sky one afternoon as the family returned home from a trip to town. The clouds just parted, forming an opening, and there it was. So clear we could count the flagstones. It was turreted with 2 tall spires, each topped with a red pennant that streamed in the wind. It had a large, rounded wooden door gilded in iron. As the car rounded a curve in the road, the sight was lost behind some trees. When the sky came back into view, only the clouds remained.
Now, if this was just Fata Morgana, what building was being reflected? Are there a ton of medieval castles in western Kentucky? Here's the other thing about Fata Morgana. It doesn't appear as close as it did in Barton's story. When you see the mirage, it's off on the horizon, not over your head. Clearly, weather cannot account for every floating city. So for now, let's just say that these things are exactly what they appear to be, floating cities. There one minute and gone the next. This raises an obvious question. Does anyone live there? And what are they like? Over the centuries, there have been stories that, while far from providing a definitive answer, offer a few hints. Phantom islands like High Brazil were said to be home to the dead, demons, and the fairies, or in places like Scotland, the Finfolk, a race of semi-aquatic shape-shifting sorcerers. Legends are one thing, but what about stories? Has anyone ever claimed to have met a person from one of these floating cities? Well, as it turns out, way before people ever even thought about flying saucers, they were talking about ships sailing through the sky. And I don't mean spaceships. I mean like big wooden sailing ships that cut through the clouds. Where do they come from? Well, different places had different names. In medieval France, they called it Magonia, a realm of clouds where evil sorcerers resided. These sorcerers had the ability to affect weather patterns and sometimes made contact with human beings on the earth below. In the 9th century, the Archbishop of Lyon wrote this.
Some believe that there is a certain region, which they call Magonia, whence ships sail in the clouds in order to carry back to that region those fruits of the earth which are destroyed by hail and tempests. The sailors paying rewards to the storm wizards and themselves receiving corn and other produce. I saw 4 persons in bonds, 3 men and a woman who they said had fallen from these same ships. After keeping them for some days in captivity, they had brought them before the assembled multitude, as we have said, in our presence to be stoned.
Remember, these people didn't come from spaceships. They were said to have come from actual ships in the sky, complete with things like sails and anchors, although the location is unclear. A good example of this either occurred in England or Ireland over 800 years ago. According to the story, as it has been passed down over the centuries, around the year 1211, something strange fell out of the sky, interrupting a congregation gathered for Sunday Mass. When everyone rushed outside, they saw an anchor on a rope leading up into the clouds. It had apparently gotten caught on the frame of the church's front door. As everyone's eyes drifted skyward, they finally saw what the rope was attached to. The account says this.
The people rushed out of the church and saw in the sky a ship with men on board, floating before the anchor cable, and they saw a man leap overboard and jump down to the anchor, as if to release it. He looked as if he was swimming in water. The folk rushed up and tried to seize him, but the bishop forbade the people to hold the man, for it might kill him, he said. The man was freed and hurried up to the ship, where the crew cut the rope and the ship sailed out of sight.
Although we don't normally see sailing ships in the clouds today, we do see UFOs. And when they get big enough, people sometimes compare them to floating cities. For example, in February of 1979, Joseph Ostrom awoke in the middle of the night while staying on the island of Crete in Greece. Joseph said that he and his wife saw a tall person enter their bedroom, then escort them to a huge floating city-like structure, populated by hundreds of humans in one-piece jumpsuits. More recently, on July 21st, 2002, law enforcement officer Guillermo Arias said that his van went dead while patrolling a remote road right near Chajan, Argentina. This officer claimed that shortly after abandoning the vehicle, he saw a genuine triangular floating city in the sky, complete with figures moving past long rows of windows. This sighting only lasted 2 or 3 seconds, but he said that it felt like a lifetime, and the city's departure left behind a strange glow in the area that lasted another 20 or so minutes. Other officers reported lights in the sky above the area that night. And then, in August of 2005, an eyewitness reported to MUFON that he had seen something similar above the town of Clinton, Connecticut. He was near the marsh in his backyard when the craft appeared. The witness compared it to a vast floating city and, like the Argentinian police officer 3 years earlier, said that he could see vague figures through the windows. After a brief interaction with some shadowy figures in the marsh, the witness watched the beings ascend into the spaceship and slowly depart into the distance over the course of the next hour. Could descriptions of cities in the sky actually be extraterrestrial motherships? Is that what people have been seeing over the centuries? Are these the reason behind some of the Chinese sightings, the ones that can't be explained by Fata Morgana? Clearly, the floating cities seen today might have something to do with the UFO phenomenon, something that has existed alongside human beings since the era of Magonia, something that keeps reworking itself to keep one step ahead of us. But what if these visions in the sky don't come from another world? What if they come from right here on Earth? Remember what was said in the beginning, that the floating cities might be the product of Project Bluebeam. Look, you're watching What Lurks Beneath, so I don't need to go into all the details. But in case you're unfamiliar, Project Bluebeam is a conspiracy theory that claims that authorities will use holographic technology to manipulate the American public. This might take many different forms, from staging an alien invasion to projecting Jesus Christ's second coming. According to ufologist Richard Dolan, the first mention of Project Bluebeam appeared in the June 14, 1994 issue of a small American journal called Contact the Phoenix Project. In the years since, people have blamed Project Bluebeam for anything and everything seen in the sky. So, could Project Bluebeam be used to project cities into the sky? It seems possible, although who knows why they would do that. Maybe it's just a test run for something in the future. You can never be too sure. But there's another possibility. Decades before anyone dreamed up Project Bluebeam, people in the government were already thinking of new ways to dominate the airspace. In the 1960s, the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development came up with a crazy idea. What if you could house people in the sky? It was an ambitious project, but they knew just the people to do it. You see, American architect and futurist Buckminster Fuller had already come up with this idea a few years earlier. He teamed up with his Japanese-American counterpart, Shoji Sadao, and the two of them brainstormed a project they called Cloud 9. Cloud 9 was supposed to be a floating city. The plan was to create a megastructure in the shape of a geodesic sphere that, if it was heated with enough sunlight, would rise up into the sky. I know what you're saying, that this sounds crazy, but hear me out. Or rather, hear them out. You see, as geodesic spheres get bigger, they also get stronger due to the unique way that stress is distributed around them. And as a sphere grows, so too does the volume contained inside it, at a much faster rate. Because of this, Buckminster Fuller speculated that if you used a sphere big enough, one say a mile wide, and the temperature inside the sphere was even 1 degree warmer than its surroundings, it might very easily take off into the sky. Supposedly, he had made all the proper calculations and suspected that a balloon-like geodesic sphere could lift something as heavy as a city, allowing people to live among the clouds. Neither architect planned on Cloud 9 being tethered to any specific location. Rather, the plan was to have it sort of drift aimlessly above the Earth. The hope was that Cloud 9 might help solve some of the sustainability issues facing our planet's consumption of non-renewable resources. So, the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development contacted Buckminster and Shoji, who then assembled a team. The project was renamed the Triton City and was planned to launch either above Tokyo or above Baltimore. This version of the floating city, however, was going to be tethered in place. The proposal that the team put together involved immense housing blocks, big enough to support 5,000 people each. Of course, pardon the pun, the project never got off the ground. Today, the only thing that we really have to show for it is a large-scale model of the Triton City, which sits in the lobby of Texas's Johnson Presidential Library in Austin. Otherwise, the government abandoned the whole thing. Or did they? Here's the thing. Just like other UFOs, floating cities seem to represent not one phenomenon, but multiple phenomenon. While Fata Morgana obviously accounts for a lot of these sightings, an equal number remain truly mysterious. Yes, some may simply be illusions, but others might be, well, a lot of things. They might be visions, they might be interdimensional slips where another reality bleeds into ours once every 7 years. They might be mythical, supernatural phantom islands. They might be alien motherships from another galaxy, and they might even be holographic technology projected by Project Bluebeam, weaponized against the American public. And who knows? Maybe some cities in the sky represent a secret elite technology developed over the past 60 years. Or maybe it's ancient technology. In a world where governments operate with complete autonomy and absolute secrecy, anything seems possible. What do you think? Are there cities floating above us right now? Are they responsible for some of these UFO sightings? Let me know what you think down in the comments. And because you guys made it this far into the episode, I want you to comment below floating cities, so that way I know who made it to the end and who didn't. And if you guys enjoy storytelling where we dive into strange, mysterious cases of the supernatural and mysterious, then what are you waiting for? Slap that like and subscribe button for more content just like this from yours truly. And as always, never forget, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you all in the very next episode.